Hello, this is Mr. Huff, and I would like to take a moment to explain this assignment to you. It's basically putting together a drawing set of the Automoblox truck. So let's look at what we're going to be doing. Allow me to read these instructions to you. So beginning with your Automoblox truck assembly drawing from assignment 403, prepare and complete a set of drawings that will support this assembly. When you are dimensioning, please use the datum format. Be sure to capture the overall length, width, and height. Focus on dimensioning major features. Some of the parts have extreme detail, and you don't need to define all of that. For example, on the rim or on the tread, on the rim, you may have a very complicated spoke pattern. Don't spend time trying to dimension all of that. And then on the tread, it may have a complex pattern on the tread on the outside, so you don't need to really dimension that. So focus on the dimensions that tend to describe the overall shape and just some of the key, or well, most of the key parameters to reproduce that part. So I don't want you to overkill. It would be really easy to be cluttered. It's going to be better to make sure that you don't have duplication rather than every little thing defined. And I'll give you an example as we go through this. So you're going to start with your exploded view, and on there you have these balloons. The balloons are numbered for each part, and you're going to use this order to determine your page order after the assembly and exploded view with the bill of materials included on it. So in this case, we'll start with the passenger section, then the axle peg, then the bed. You see how I'm following the numbers there. On page 2, the first drawing page, you're going to add a general tolerances table, and I have it listed for you. In this drawing, we will be using 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places, and 4 decimal places, and it's just a good idea in case you throw some angles in there to note that those are plus or minus 5 degrees. I'm not going to ask you to do any symmetric and bilateral and deviation tolerances. We're just going to apply these for the entire drawing set. So you only need to state it on one page. There is a link to a very incomplete drawing set, but it will give you some suggested layouts. For the axle peg, I would like you to match this drawing pretty much exactly with the overall length values on the internal values listed above the section view and the overall external length values on the lower part of that section view. Notice how I did not dimension the little ribbed portions. I'm sticking to the gross measurements, or the measurements that mostly define the part. And on the circular view, notice how I only dimension the circles that are visible. Actually, to dimension this properly, we would need to add several more views, and I think you get the idea. So we're just going to match this one. There are going to be some places where your inventor should be set up to go to 2 decimal places, and some of the measurements are more than 2 decimal places. So you will need to verify the precision on some of these, especially if they look like they're rounded. So if it's like a 0.18, you may need to open that to see if that is a rounded value. So you double click the dimension and you look at the value in the model value box. And in this case, you see that it goes to 4 decimal places. So we're going to change the primary unit precision to 4 decimal places. So what do you do if it is more than 4? In some cases, it's just a random number that will be as many as 8 places long. So in this case, we're going to use a default of 3 decimal places. So if it's more than 4, switch to a 3 decimal place primary unit precision. Let's look at the final checklist. You need to make sure you have a complete PDF. It will be one PDF with about 8 pages. Make sure they are in the correct order following your balloons. Make sure your measurement format is datum and that it's correctly placed and not overlapping and not, messy. That you have verified and adjusted your measurement precisions throughout the document, and that's tedious, but you need to do it. I'll be checking for a specific view to make sure that they are correct. Make sure you have appropriate sections and detail views included. Make sure your annotations about scale and general dimensions are also included. And make sure your part names have descriptive names. Most of these are going to be stock parts that are already named. Don't worry about changing those. Previously, you should have changed the materials. I'm not so worried about that. Make sure you're using uppercase lettering, and make sure there's no overlap of the borders. Let's take a look at the drawing set. So this is the first page from assignment 403, and you should have an assembly, and you should have an exploded view, and some sort of bill of materials list. We're going to be using this item number, which should be over here on the side. We're going to use item number to specify what goes next. So if we look at this, we should have the passenger section, then the axle peg, then the bed, etc., etc. All right, so this is a suggested layout for a passenger section. Notice that I include a few sample measurements to understand what's going on with these slots here. We need to do a cross-section view so that we can see inside. And then we need to, this is just giving you the height. You would also need to include width and depth, that sort of thing. So you'll add some measurements like this. Notice how right here I opted not to include the dimension of this little tiny feature, choosing these features instead. The thing is, if we add the features or the measurements to include this little notch, it's going to be really cluttered here. So really, I'm more interested in what we can see on the front view. Notice that I don't have my general dimension table. I would like to see that right down here. Your general tolerances need to be listed down here somewhere. Okay. Also notice that my views all include some scale so that we know what we're looking at. This is obviously not 1:1, so it's a half scale that we use to make that work. This is the axle peg, and I would like your drawing to look pretty much exactly like this. So I'm using a 2:1 scale to make it easy to read and easy to see. I have my internal dimensions here, my external dimensions here, and I just use the visible circles. Notice how my hidden lines are turned off for this one, and that my section view shows that quarter cut out of it nice and clearly. This is an example of what you might do for the bed. Again, I'm more interested in overall dimensions that will help us reproduce this part. So I don't really go into the details here about how this was made, but I include a detailed view so that you can see what's happening there. Again, I'm not so worried about some of the feature detail dimensions, just overall dimensions. Okay, and again, this is not a complete set of measurements. I only show you this thickness here and the position of that slot, and there's more. You need to make sure you fully dimension or adequately dimension length, width, and height. This might be an example of the front view. Notice how in this case I did specify the width of this little slot on the side. In this case, it didn't cause undue clutter, so I went ahead and put that in there. And this is an example of how the rim might be displayed. Notice how I'm using the section view to define the diameters and the radius that you would see that are important for defining that tire, or that rim, sorry. Also notice how I don't go into any detail about how the spokes are dimensioned. If you wanted to throw an angle in here, that would be fine. Also, I do this detail view to show some of the internal dimensions here. Mostly this is what we're interested in because this is where the tread would sit. And if you want to identify some of the offsets here, that would be fine. So this is a pretty good example of how you may lay out the rim. For the windshield, don't go into a lot of trouble trying to define this slope here. If nothing else, just go through overall width, height, and depth. You do need to include a section view that shows the internal shape of what's happening inside the windshield. But there's no measurement examples on here. You will need to fully dimension all three axes. Notice how this is a pretty good example of how to show the tread. Just like the rim, we're using the section view to show the radius and diameters. I've included a detail of the tread pattern, but I don't give any dimensions. You could use this to show the dimensions for width and how thick the tread is, and that little piece there that makes the circle around. So be sure to include adequate dimensions to describe this. Anyway, that's a quick overview of how this assignment is going to work.